Some moments never leave you. They stick to your skin, seep into your bones, play on repeat in the quiet hours of the night when the world is still, and there's nowhere left to hide from your own thoughts. I wish I could say I didn't see it coming, that I was blindsided, innocent, untouched by the weight of my own choices. But that would be a lie, because deep down I knew. I knew the moment it started. I just didn't want to admit it. 2 years. That's how long it's been. 2 years since everything changed. 2 years since the moment I realized my marriage, my entire life, was not what I thought it was. And if I close my eyes, I can still hear his voice, clear as day. I love watching you do that. At first, I thought it was nothing. Just a simple comment, a passing observation. But something about the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered, made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't quite explain. I brushed it off, laughed, changed the subject, but the feeling stuck with me, a small, nagging discomfort in the back of my mind. And as time went on, that feeling only grew, because it wasn't just once. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It kept happening. Every glance, every offhand remark, every moment that should have been ordinary but somehow wasn't. And then, one day, it hit me. Like a slow, creeping realization that turns your stomach inside out. My husband wasn't looking at me the way a man looks at his wife. He was looking at me the way a man looks at a possession. A trophy. A thing that exists not just for love, but for validation. For admiration. And not just from him. From others. The truth settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. And suddenly, everything made sense. The way he seemed more affectionate when other men noticed me. The way his eyes would flicker with something almost like satisfaction when I was the center of attention. The way he encouraged it. And that's when the questions started. Dangerous questions. Questions I wasn't ready to answer. Was it really love, if he only wanted me when others did too? Was I really his wife, or was I just a performance? And if he loved watching me be wanted, what would happen if I let myself be? I wish I could say I made the right choice. That I walked away. That I never let it go too far. But the truth? The truth is messier than that. And if you stay with me till the end, you'll see why. You spend years building something solid, something real. At least, that's what you tell yourself. Brick by brick, memory by memory, you construct a life with someone. A home, a marriage, a future. And then one day, you wake up and all that's left is the routine. The shell of what once was, but never what it should have been. That was my marriage. 10 years. 10 years of birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, and whispered promises. 10 years of shared laughter, of I love you spoken out of habit more than feeling. 10 years of being a wife, a mother, a woman who gave everything she had, only to realize she had been running on empty for a long, long time. And my husband? He wasn't always this way. There was a time when he looked at me like I was his entire world. When his touch was filled with warmth, when his words held meaning. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Not suddenly. Not in one big, dramatic moment. But slowly, subtly. Like the slow dimming of a once bright light, flickering into something cold, something distant. He started working later. Coming home quieter. His eyes were always on a screen, his hands always occupied with something that wasn't me. Conversations became shorter. Touches became scarce. Kisses became routine, pecks on the cheek, absent-minded, impersonal. And eventually, even those faded away. At first, I told myself it was normal. That all marriages went through phases. That love changed shape over time, but it never disappeared. I convinced myself that we were just comfortable. But deep down, I knew. I knew that comfort wasn't supposed to feel like loneliness. It's strange, isn't it? How women can be everything, a wife, a mother, a caretaker, and yet feel completely invisible. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a presence. A function. Someone to make sure the bills were paid, the laundry was folded, the meals were made. And he didn't even see me anymore. Not until I did something to make him look. And that's when it started. I didn't notice it at first. The way his eyes would linger, not on me, not in a way that made me feel loved, but in a way that made me feel observed. The way he'd glance up from his phone when I bent over to pick something up. The way his fingers would drum against the table when I stretched, reached, moved in ways that reminded him I wasn't just a wife. I was a woman. It was subtle. Too subtle for me to question at first. Until one day, he spoke. "I love watching you do that." It should have made me happy. A compliment from my husband, something I hadn't heard in so long. But the way he said it, it didn't feel like love. It felt like approval. Like I had unknowingly stepped into a role I didn't know I was auditioning for. And suddenly, I saw it everywhere. The way he'd perk up when another man's eyes landed on me in public. The way he'd smirk when a waiter gave me an extra second of attention. The way he'd encourage me to wear something a little tighter, a little lower, a little more noticeable. It wasn't me he wanted. It was the idea of me being wanted. And that's where it all began. The questions. The doubts. The quiet, creeping hunger for something more. Because if my own husband only saw me when others did, then what did that mean for me? What did that mean for us? It happened on a Tuesday. A completely ordinary day, at least, that's what I thought. The air was heavy with routine, the same way it always was. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, moving through the motions without thinking. Cutting vegetables, stirring a pot on the stove, wiping the counter with one hand while balancing my phone in the other. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of the TV playing in the next room, it was all so normal. Just another evening in a life that had become predictable, colorless. And then, I felt it. That weight. That lingering, unspoken thing. A presence that didn't belong. I turned, and there he was. Sitting at the table, elbows resting on the wood, eyes fixed on me. Not in the way a husband looks at his wife, not in the way I had spent years hoping he would, but in a way that made something inside me shift. I forced a smile, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "What?" I asked, half laughing, because when someone stares at you for too long, you feel the need to fill the silence. To make it normal. And then he said it. "I love watching you do that." It took me a second to process it. The words were simple, harmless on the surface. But there was something in his voice, something in the way his eyes didn't move, didn't blink, just stayed on me like I was something to be observed, to be studied. A slow chill spread down my spine. I laughed again, softer this time. "What?" "Cooking." He tilted his head, almost like he was considering the question. "Everything." And just like that, I felt something unfamiliar. A shift, an unease that wrapped itself around me, slow and suffocating. Because I should have been happy. My husband was noticing me again. He was looking at me, speaking to me, giving me attention, the very thing I had been aching for years. And yet, it didn't feel like affection. It felt like possession. Like I wasn't a person, but an object. A thing meant to be looked at, admired. Like my value didn't come from who I was, but from the fact that someone, anyone, might want me. And suddenly, memories started flooding back. The way his expression had changed last week when a stranger at the grocery store held my gaze for a second too long. The way he smirked when our waiter complimented my perfume. The way he never pulled me closer, never claimed me as his own in those moments. Instead, he would watch. Not me, them. The other men. As if he were waiting for something. The realization hit me in fragments, piece by piece, like scattered puzzle pieces that refused to fit together until, suddenly, they did. It wasn't me he loved. It was the idea of me being wanted. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. He was more affectionate when he thought someone else might want what he had. More attentive when he believed someone else's eyes were on me. It was as if my worth, my presence, my entire identity in his world only came into focus when others acknowledged it first. And that hurt in a way I can't even explain. Because what does that say about a marriage? About love? If the person you vowed to spend your life with only sees you through the reflection of someone else's desire. And worse, what did it say about me? That I let it happen? That I craved it? Was I really this desperate for attention? So hungry for validation that I was willing to accept it, even like this? Even when it wasn't real? Because that's the part that scared me the most. Not him. Not his strange, twisted way of loving me. But me. The way I felt when I realized what was happening. Because deep down, beneath all the confusion, all the discomfort, there was something else. A spark. A curiosity. A question that should have never entered my mind. If my husband loved watching me be wanted, what would happen if I let myself be? And once that thought took root, there was no turning back. It didn't take long before the patterns became impossible to ignore. The shifts in his behavior weren't just coincidences, they were deliberate, calculated. And once I realized that, everything else started to unravel. He was more affectionate on certain days, more present, more engaged. But not with me, not in the way I had always wanted. It wasn't my thoughts he was interested in, not my dreams, not the way my heart beat faster when he used to touch me. No, it was something else entirely. It was the way other men looked at me. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself I was overthinking, letting my insecurities get the best of me. But then the compliments started. Not the kind a husband gives his wife out of love, but the kind that felt off. That dress looks good on you. You should wear it more often. I bet other men would love it. That guy couldn't stop staring at you earlier. Must feel nice, huh? I like when you get attention. It suits you. The first time he said something like that, I laughed. Because what else was I supposed to do? I thought it was a joke. Thought maybe, just maybe, he was trying to be playful, to flirt with me the way he used to. But there was something in his voice, something real. A quiet, underlying truth that made my stomach twist in knots. And then I saw it. The way his expression changed when another man glanced at me in passing. The way his grip on my waist would tighten when I smiled at a stranger, but not in a possessive way. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Something darker. It was satisfaction. That's when the questions started clawing at me. Why? Why would a man enjoy his wife being noticed by others? Why would my husband, who once barely looked at me at all, suddenly become more attentive when he realized I was seen? I had to know. I had to be sure. So, I tested him. The opportunity came at a work event. A charity gala, fancy, expensive, filled with the kind of people who spoke in hushed tones and laughed politely at things that weren't funny. My husband was there, of course, charming and composed, the perfect image of a devoted spouse. But I was watching him now. Really watching him. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I played a role. I engaged. Smiled. Let my voice carry just a little softer, let my laughter linger just a second longer. It wasn't much, just light, harmless conversation with a colleague I had known for years. But it was enough. Enough to make my husband notice. I expected tension. A shift in his posture, a slight narrowing of his eyes. Maybe even the quiet possessiveness that I had longed for in the early years of our marriage. But when I turned to steal a glance at him, my breath caught in my throat. He wasn't upset. He was enjoying it. His lips were curled into something just shy of a smirk, his eyes dark, but not with jealousy, with something else. The ride home was quiet, tension thick between us, but not in the way one would expect after a wife blatantly flirts with another man in front of her husband. No, there was no anger. No resentment. Just silence. A slow, knowing, almost amused smirk. And then he said it. Is there a difference? I don't know what I felt in that moment. It wasn't just one thing, it was everything, all at once. Anger. Shock. A deep, hollow ache that settled into my bones. And beneath it all, the worst feeling of all. Relief. Because now I knew. There was no more questioning, no more second guessing. The truth was out, raw and exposed between us. And it shattered me in a way that no betrayal ever had before. Because it wasn't another woman. It wasn't an affair, not in the traditional sense. But it was something worse. He never needed someone else. He had been unfaithful to me in a different way, by reducing me to something less than a wife. By making my worth contingent on whether or not other men wanted me. And I had let him. I wanted to scream. To cry. To demand answers. But what was there left to say? He had already said everything that mattered in 5 little words. Is there a difference? And the most painful part? I didn't know the answer anymore. After that night, something shifted. Not just between us, but inside me. I wish I could say I left. That I walked out, packed my bags, and never looked back. But the truth is, I stayed. Not because I forgave him, not because I still loved him, not in the way I once did, but because I needed to understand. I needed to know how deep this went, how far he would let it go. So I started testing him, the way he had been testing me for years. At first, it was small things. A lingering smile at a cashier, a casual touch on the arm of a male colleague. Nothing serious, nothing that crossed a real line. Just enough to see if he'd react. But he didn't. Not in the way a husband should. No tension in his jaw. No dark glances. No silent accusations in the car ride home. If anything, he seemed more engaged. More attentive. As if the sight of me being desired by another man breathed life into something inside him. So I pushed further. I let my conversations with other men stretch longer. Let my laughter come easier. I dressed in ways I knew would catch attention, not for them, not for myself, but for him. To see how far he would let me go. To see if there was a line he wasn't willing to cross. But there wasn't. If anything, the more I leaned into it, the more he leaned in too. He would tease me after dinner parties, his voice low and amused. You had him eating out of the palm of your hand. And I would watch his expression, waiting for some sign of discomfort. Some flash of regret. But it never came. Only satisfaction. And that's when I realized, this wasn't a marriage anymore. This wasn't love. It was a game. A twisted, silent game of validation and attention, a performance where I was both the lead actress and the pawn. And God help me, I played along. Because what else was I supposed to do? Walk away? Pretend I didn't know the truth? The problem wasn't just him anymore, it was me. The way I felt when I realized I could hold power over him like this. The way my heart raced, not when another man looked at me, but when I saw the approval in my husband's eyes because of it. The way I had once craved his love, and now I craved something else entirely. Control. But control is a dangerous thing. It makes you reckless. It makes you forget who you used to be. And I didn't see how far I had gone, how much I had lost myself, until one night, standing in front of a mirror, I caught my own reflection and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She was different. Her eyes were sharper, her smile carefully placed, every movement rehearsed, deliberate. She was playing a role. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't love. This was performance. And I had become the very thing I despised. And the worst part? I didn't know if I wanted to stop. The question wouldn't leave me. It clung to my skin, whispered in my mind at night, followed me through every room of our house like a shadow I couldn't shake. If my husband loved watching me be wanted, was it really infidelity if I gave him what he wanted? I turned the thought over and over in my mind, like a stone in my palm, smooth and cold. What did it mean to be unfaithful? Was it betrayal if he was complicit? If he enjoyed it? Could I even call it cheating when he wasn't just tolerating it, he was encouraging it? And yet, why did it feel so wrong? The weight of my choices pressed against my chest. I had spent so long believing that infidelity was black and white, an act, a moment, a decision. But now I wasn't so sure. Because this was something else. A slow unraveling, a descent into something neither of us had named, but both of us had allowed. I told myself I was still in control, that I could stop anytime. That I could walk away from this game before it went too far. But if that were true, why hadn't I? Why was I still here? Was it because I still loved him? Or was it because, for the first time in years, I finally felt like I mattered? And that was the most painful part of all, realizing that maybe I wasn't just playing the game for him. Maybe I was playing it for myself. Because I had spent years being invisible. Years feeling like nothing more than a role, a wife, a mother, a woman who existed to keep things running, but never truly seen. And now? Now I had his attention. Even if it was twisted, even if it wasn't the way I had wanted it, I had it. And wasn't that better than nothing at all? But was it? Was this what I wanted? To be watched but never truly loved? To be desired only when others desired me first? To exist not as a person, but as a reflection of someone else's attention. Should I leave? Should I stay? Should I keep playing the game, knowing full well that the more I played, the further I drifted from the woman I used to be? I didn't know the answer. Maybe I never would. But one thing had become painfully clear to me in all of this. Maybe in the end, we were both unfaithful, just in different ways. So now I turn to you. Because this isn't just my story, it's a story so many of us have lived in silence, trapped between what we think love should be and what it really is. Have you ever felt it? That slow, creeping realization that the person you love doesn't see you the way they should? That you've become something else, an accessory, a role, a carefully curated image instead of a person. And tell me, was I wrong? Was I wrong to play along? To test him? To push the boundaries just to see if he would stop me? Or was I simply playing the game he started? The game he built? The game he wanted? Because that's the part one can't stop thinking about. If I was unfaithful in my heart, if I crossed lines in my mind, was it really betrayal when the one person I vowed to be faithful to enjoyed it? Encouraged it? Wanted it? Is love still love when it's built on conditions? When it's dependent on the eyes of others? Or was this never love at all? I don't have the answers. Maybe you do. Maybe you've been here before, standing at the edge of something you don't recognize, questioning whether it's worth saving or whether it was already lost long before you even noticed. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have walked away? Or would you have kept playing the part, knowing it was the only way to keep the attention of the person you once believed loved you? I want to hear your thoughts, your stories, your truths. Maybe together, we can unravel the things we're too afraid to say out loud. Drop a comment below and tell me, when does love stop being love? When does it become something else entirely? And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the weight of a love that isn't really love at all, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones we don't say out loud. But here we say them. And sometimes, saying them is the first step to finally understanding them. Love should never feel like a test. It should never feel like something you have to earn, something you have to prove, something you have to perform just to keep someone's attention. And yet, for so many of us, that's exactly what it becomes. We bend. We mold ourselves into what they want. We adjust, we shift. We become versions of ourselves that aren't entirely real, but close enough to pass. Because isn't that what love is? Compromise? Sacrifice? Learning how to be enough for someone. That's what I told myself. Over and over. That if I just played my role well enough, if I just gave him what he wanted, maybe, one day, he would see me again. Not as something to be admired, not as something to be observed through the eyes of others, but as me. But love should never feel like a performance. Love should be a place where you can exist freely, without conditions, without having to earn your right to be desired. It should be a home, not a stage. The worst betrayals aren't always physical. They don't always come in the form of lies or affairs or secrets whispered in the dark. Sometimes betrayal is quieter, more subtle, more insidious. Sometimes the real betrayal is realizing that somewhere along the way, you stopped being true to yourself. That you traded in pieces of who you were just to hold on to something that was never real in the first place. And that's the scariest part. Not losing him. Not losing the marriage, the title, the shared history. But losing myself. Because the truth? The truth is, I don't even know when it happened. I don't know the exact moment I stopped being a wife and became something else. A reflection. A validation. A performance crafted to be watched rather than loved. All I know is that by the time I realized it, I was too far gone to recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror. And maybe that was the real infidelity. Not what I did. Not what he did. But what we both did to the love we once had. The way we let it wither. The way we turned it into something unrecognizable. The way we let it slip away, inch by inch, until all that was left was a game neither of us knew how to stop playing. Be careful what kind of love you settle for. Because one day, you might wake up and realize it was never love at all.